The editing tools in DesignShop allow you the ability to add holes, change stitch directions, and generally manipulate your embroidery elements, but it will also allow you to add and manipulate vector elements in your design. So let's look at how to use those tools appropriately. So first I'm going to just create a fill. And in this fill, let's say that I needed to add a hole, or if there was another or a different color of something over it. So I had this circle over this fill, and I wanted to cut out the stitches underneath. I have the ability to do that. Now when I'm digitizing, I can do that very easily with just adding the hole as I go. But if I've completed it and that step has passed me up, I can go back in and edit in that hole. And the first thing that I would do is select the element that I want to edit, and then I'll select my insert hole tool, and that's going to be in my editing tools, which are these kind of four little guys right here. So I'm going to select this, and I'm going to zoom in, and then I'm just going to digitize around. Now I am creating a little bit of an overlap, but I'm just going to digitize around as if I was creating just another shape. I hit enter to finish it, and it's going to create that as a hole within that piece. And then if I had another one, that tool's still active, so I could keep going and keep adding more tools. If I want to get out of that, I can select another tool, or I can hit escape on my keyboard to make that go away. So if I look in 3D, I see no difference, but if I hide this green piece, you can see that I have that hole underneath, so I'm saving some stitches that way. So if you have overlapping fills, this is one way to save yourself some stitches. Now, if they're really, really small elements, I'm probably not going to knock out the fill underneath, but in this case, I would. Now, kind of some siblings to this tool. So let's move this green piece out of the way. You have options with this tool. If I click and hold for half a second, you get those options. You get the option of a split line or a fill island, and let's see what those are. If I select the hole, if you look up top, I actually get the properties of that hole. And right now the outline type is set to hole, but if I look, I kind of have those similar options available here. If it's a split, this is going to be a little bit hard to see. You can kind of see it. So a split, all that does is it makes sure that the needle penetrations line up on the line that you digitized. So it will add just an extra needle penetration right along that line. If it is, sorry, select that, and then let me come over here and grab this outline again. Sometimes splits are a little hard for me to select on screen, so I come over here to the project view to select them. If I want, I can also change that to a fill island, and inside of there I can have a different fill. So it will still sew all at once. So there's the underlay underneath of it, but as it fills in, it's filling in all at once. But the patterning is different, and you can actually go into the properties of that and change that even more. So if we wanted to get completely crazy, we could do that. We could change the partition sequence to one of my favorites, where it kind of zigzags and looks like a lightning kind of pattern. So you can change that pattern of the fill, so that kind of brick layer that the stitches, or the brick pattern that the stitches make, you can change that, but it's just inside that area that you changed it. So again, a hole will take away the stitches from that area. A split will just have the needle penetration, will add a penetration on that edge, so you kind of get an outline of that, or kind of a slightly embossed look. And then a fill island allows you to sew it in all at once, but change the pattern right within that area, which is really kind of cool and kind of clever. There are other things that you can do with those splits. So The hole and the fill island have to be a complete shape. They have to connect, but a split does not. So I'm going to create a shape. It's a shape I refer to quite often. I'll do a little leaf, but instead of using a walk stitch as the outline, we're actually going to use the stitches themselves to kind of create those veins. So let's look at doing that. All right, so I have this guy here. I'm going to just digitize a leaf real quick. You guys can judge my freehand leaf drawing skills all you want. All right, so we'll go here, here, and we'll have a stitch direction like this. And I chose that stitch direction pretty carefully because I kind of want it to go across the form. And if I decide, so let me select this, let me get my edit tool, I have it selected. Now I'm going to click and hold for half a second underneath that hole to get to my split line. And this you can digitize starting inside or out of the form, it doesn't matter. I'm going to start with a left click. I'm going to digitize that vein. And then I'm going to hit enter to complete that shape. And when you have the wireframe outline selected, it's going to be a little bit hard to see, but if I deselect, you can see that that vein suddenly just appears right there. So yeah, a nice little tool for that. Now, the reason I chose my stitch direction the way that I did, if I had a different stitch direction, so now I'm choosing my stitch direction tool, which is another of these editing tools. I can change my stitch directions that exist. I can add more, so I can have these stitches kind of curve around the form. Now be careful with that. You can really make some crazy stitches. That's not going to sew well. Look how dense that is right there. But what you can do is choose to have the stitches kind of flow throughout the form a little bit, and if you do it gently, you can get away with it. What I was going to tell you is if my stitch direction and my split lines line up, so if I kind of have this go kind of parallel to that, if I go into 3D, that split kind of disappears right along those stitches. You can see it again when it starts to change a little bit, but typically to make those splits show up, you want your stitch directions to kind of go across them. So let's do that again. So I'm going to come up here, I'm going to come this way here, and then other things that you can do, you can curve your stitch directions. So your stitch direction line works just like a wireframe line, and when my cursor is over it, I get a little line beside it, and that means that if I left click, I'll add a straight point. If I right click, I'll add a curve point, and now I can move those ends, I can move the middle, so I can curve this out a little bit. There we go. So I can create kind of a three-dimensional curved look to it. And again, whenever I start distorting these or moving these points, I try not to go too severely, because then my stitches start to bunch up, or I start getting gaps because I'm making really sharp curves. And as we all know, you can't actually have a curved stitch because the stitch is just a piece of thread between two needle penetrations. There's no way to curve that. So if your stitch length is a little bit longer and your curve is a little bit shorter or a little bit tighter, you start getting really jagged kind of looking curves, and you start getting gaps in your design. So I try to avoid that. All right, so we've looked at editing in curved stitch directions. If you want to digitize in a curved stitch direction, if you click and hold for a half a second underneath here, you can get to insert curved direction line, in which case you would digitize it like you would a walk stitch, left, right, left. This is way too curved for this application. Hit enter, and you might be asking, why is this so curved for this application? Well, so I'm going to hit escape to get out of the tool. If you look at this outside of 3D, you can see how bunched that is. So I would really need to kind of, and here's where it can get gappy. I would really need to look at how I want these stitches to go. Also, if you want your curves to arc out perfectly. If you hold control on a curve point, it will arc out perfectly. That works when you're editing the wireframe outline. It works when you're editing curved stitch directions, curved splices, kind of any of those curved, even with the line type of envelope or perspective in your lettering, that keyboard shortcut will work. So if you want it to arc out perfectly, hold control when you do it. So I can digitize curved, I can edit in curved stitch direction lines. Let's click and hold for a half a second and look at this last one over here, which is auto compute. If I have an element and I just want the computer to figure out where the stitch directions should be in it, you can click on that and have it automatically figure things out. So let's go back in and let's open up a design. I'm going to go back to the graphics folder that's loaded with your software. And let's open up Coffee Cup for one, and I'm going to open up columns for the other. So coffeecup.eps and columns.bmp. And I'm going to digitize this E. I did this in the complex fill session. I apparently can't digitize and talk at the same time, sorry guys. But I'm going to digitize around this and create this fill. Now, as I go, so let me hit enter to finish this. So right now it's asking for holes. I don't have any holes, so I could hit enter. If for some reason you get distracted or the phone rings or whatever and you hit escape to get out of the tool, you no longer have a complex fill and you actually have a vector fill. Same thing would happen if you were using the manual fill input mode. It will do one step at a time. If you hit escape while digitizing using a complex fill tool, it will just let go at whatever point you are. So at this point I have this lovely vector fill. What do I do with this? I don't know what to do with this. Well, you need to tell it where to start and stop, because that would have been the next step. So you can click on this to start it again and say, I want to start here, I want to stop here. And then it's going to move on to the stitch direction. So let's go ahead and give it a stitch direction. Let's give it this. There we go. We have it straight up and down. Now, let me hit escape. So now we have just a straight, here, let me hide this graphic and scale this down a bit. There we go. So we have this kind of straight little E, and it's not quite like I would want it. I would typically want this to be a separate section, this middle section. And how do I do that? Well, if you're doing it when you're digitizing, you can use a unifill to do it, and it will automatically step you through and ask you for a splice. But since I didn't do that, and this is just a complex fill that I already have, I can come over here with it selected and I can say insert splice, and then I can digitize, and I will left click here and left click here to input that splice. Then I'm going to come over and I'm going to grab a stitch direction and I'm going to drag it across this way and edit that back in. So as you're digitizing, you do have the option to go back in and edit your pieces after you're done. So if you're done and it's not the way that you want it, don't worry about it. You don't have to start all over again. You can just go into your editing tools and get that kind of set the way that you want it. Also, you just watched me take essentially what was a vector element and add stitches to it. So these editing tools can be used the same way. So let's go back to that coffeecup.eps and just add stitches to it using these editing tools. So I opened that up a little bit earlier. It's right here. I've got the raster behind it. I'm just going to hide that for right now. And then I'm going to look at converting this vector list into stitches. Now this is, you've got to have the ability in your software to open vector elements to do this. So if this isn't part of your software package, you can always look at contacting your sales rep and getting that available to you. But if you have it, this is how you would use it, or one way that you could use it. And the first thing I'm going to do is figure out what I want to sew first. I think I'm going to sew this cup first. So you can just go in and say, I want to start here, end here by grabbing your entry and exit points. If you really don't care, you can just grab your stitch direction line and drag it across there, and it's already stitches. So let me put it in 3D so we can see that. And then if you wanted to have it kind of be curved, you can right click and move this along. So you can curve that a little bit. Now, it is using, when we just add stitches to this, it's going to use automatic stitch type. So it's going to look at the overall size of the design and add stitches what it feels is appropriate for the average size of that element. So right now it's using auto stitch type, and it is using a fill for that. If you wanted to specify, you can uncheck auto and make it whatever you want. I'm okay with the fill right now. That looks fairly nice to me. I don't love the entry and exit, but I'll deal with that in a minute. So this handle, I'm going to say, let's start here and stop here. And you'll notice when I clicked here, my entry and exit moved from my previous element. So it's trying to be very, very efficient for me, and it's moving them to wherever they're the closest. Now I may change that later, but it's helping me out. So I'm going to add a couple of stitch direction lines. It's not done till I tell it to be done. So that looks pretty good to me. So I'm going to hit escape. That looks good. I'm going to come back in here, and I'm going to move this exit point up here so that it doesn't meet back up with itself. So it pushes all at once, and then I am going to trim. Now, auto trim would kick in if I hit auto update or update auto ties and trims, or I can come in here and click on insert trim if I want to do it manually. Typically on my computer, I have insert trim set up for a keyboard shortcut, so I can just hit a button and make that happen. So now I want to do this coffee. And I will take my stitch direction, I will come across it this way, that way, to give it kind of a flat, planar look, because it's just the surface of the coffee. I like that. I'm going to go ahead and start there, but I'm going to exit over here so it pushes in this direction away from things that I've sewn before. Now, I can't see that shine that was on top of the coffee. I can get a hold of it two ways. One, I could hide this, or I could lock it, and then I can see it so I could select it. Or what I could do, if I knew where it was and I knew where it was in the list, I can also come over here and select it in the list. And then I'm going to grab the stitch direction, and I'm actually going to line this one up. And then I'm going to go and add a few effects to it real quick. So I'm going to come in, I'm going to turn off auto. I think satin will work just fine for me here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm going to give it a slightly random edge. So it looks like I have a few ripples and the lights playing across the surface of that coffee. So it's not quite as clean as the vector artwork underneath, but I kind of like this a little bit better. And in the end, this is your design, so do what you like. Let's move this exit point. There we go. All right, so now I'm going to do the steam. So I'm going to go from the center out. So I'm going to do this piece first. I'm going to grab my stitch direction and come across here. I'm going to grab another one and come across here so it really kind of makes some weird stitches. Normally I would be against this, but as I know that I'm going to change the stitch type here in a minute, I'm not so stressed. I'm going to do the same thing with this one. So I'm just selecting the element and then adding stitch directions. All right, so let's hide all of our graphic. And then I'm going to grab these three pieces. And I'm going to change their stitch type. So I'm going to go into properties. I'm going to turn off auto. And I'm going to make it, I think I'll make it an edge fill. And I'm going to lighten up those stitches. So I'm going to lighten up the density. Let's try 12. That's pretty good. So I've got this kind of very steam look. Now right here, I have a bunch of underlay under there. I don't want the underlay right now, so I'm going to turn all the underlay off. And again, it's very weird for me to not sew something with some sort of underlay, but as I'm making something very thin and kind of see-through, if I have underlay, you're going to see it, so I don't want to do that. And then when I was talking about having longer stitches and kind of tighter curves and it not looking so hot, this is what I was talking about, how I can't follow that curve with that long of stitch. So I'm going to go in, and I'm going to shorten my stitch length. I'll go down to 25, which is a pretty short stitch length for me. But in doing that, I follow that curve a little bit better. And then let's go ahead and add a trim in here. And I'll add another one here. And now I have a cup of coffee with some steam coming off of it. If I didn't like how thick this was or how dense this was, I could even lighten it up a little bit further. I think I like that a little bit better for this one. Yeah, I think I like that. So with your editing tools, these four guys here, you've got your insert hole, insert split, and insert fill island. You have your insert splice, which allows you to do subregions on a fill. So like that E where we had a region that had a different stitch direction and even an opposing one. And underneath both split and stitch direction, you have the option to do just a normal one, which is a straight line. You can digitize your own curved version of it, or you can have the computer auto-compute it for you. And then you also have insert entry and exit point, which allows you to kind of start over with your entry and exit point and digitize your own. So now that you've got your editing tools kind of figured out and you can really start to use them to manipulate your designs, take a chance, save one of the files that you like as something else, as a different name. So coffee cup test or coffee cup experiment, and go in to that altered file. And the reason I'm having you save it as a different name is I don't want you messing up one that sews really well for you. So save it as a different name, and then go in and start playing with these tools. See what happens when you start changing your stitch direction. See what happens if you add a splice or a split or a fill island, just so that you get a feel of what these tools can do for you. Really experiment, and you'll really start to further your designs.